Good morning from WKYT News. I'm Bill Bryant, and we welcome you to Kentucky Newsmakers. We're in the middle of an exciting off-year election season. Today's main guest has a vested interest. The campaign for Congress in Central Kentucky is off and running, and incumbent Republican Andy Barr is with us. In last week's primary, Barr got 84% of the vote to easily claim the GOP nomination. On the Democratic side, a closer finish. Retired fighter pilot Amy McGrath emerging with the nomination over Lexington Mayor Jim Gray, State Senator Reggie Thomas, and others. McGrath is pledging an aggressive race ahead, and national Democrats have signaled that Kentucky's 6th district contest is a top priority race in what they're calling the red to blue effort. Congressman Barr is seeking his 4th term in Washington. At his stops, he's talking about the recently passed tax cuts and a bill that rolls back some rules on banks. We welcome Congressman Barr back to Kentucky Newsmakers. Thanks for coming.
Great to be with you, Bill.
Well, interesting landscape now, and at least we know what it is. What kind of race are you anticipating going forward with retired Lieutenant Colonel Amy McGrath as your Democratic opponent?
Well, you know, we've been so focused on doing the job we were elected to do. We've been very busy in the district in Washington, D.C., putting forward this positive agenda that's growing our economy, a booming economy, more economic prosperity, a safer, more secure America. And so we've been focusing on doing that job. And as you said, we've passed historic tax cuts that have left Kentuckians much more prosperous. The average middle-income family in central and eastern Kentucky will now save about $2,000 on their annual tax bill every year as a result of that. We're more competitive. There's a lot of money and jobs coming back to the United States now. Our efforts to roll back burdensome regulations is working. It's lifting the economy. Consumer confidence is the highest in 2 decades. Business optimism is the highest it's been in over 30 years. And growth. We've seen 3 consecutive quarters of economic growth over 3%, and unemployment in Kentucky is the lowest it's been in 42 years. That's the lowest level it's been in the history that the Bureau of Labor Statistics has been keeping that number. And so we're focused on the results of our agenda.
So I guess you're signaling with that answer where you're going with your campaign, right?
Well, absolutely. We want to communicate to our voters and to our constituents the fact that we've been focusing on delivering solutions, we've been solving problems, and we've been delivering results, whether it's on the economy, fighting the opioid addiction crisis, whether it's focusing on making Camp Nelson a national monument, renaming the Lexington VA in honor of 2 World War II heroes from Kentucky, or strengthening our national security with the sanctions work that we're doing in the House Financial Services Committee.
I'm going to get back to this campaign, but I do want to talk about some of the issues in your term that you're serving right now. North Korea certainly has been something that has had a lot of attention with the nuclear weapons that are there and the attempts by the Trump administration to try to reach a deal. You have talked to the UN ambassador today as we're taping Kentucky Newsmakers. The reason you're contacted, you're the chair of the subcommittee that oversees sanctions, so you're being kept in the loop on this. Where are we? That's
right. So out of our committee, we passed the Otto Warmbier North Korea Nuclear Sanctions Act. It passed the House 415-2 last October, a big bipartisan vote, which was very important. That was part of the effort to put maximum pressure on North Korea. And our legislation simply said this, that if you're a foreign bank, you have a choice. You can either continue to do business with the United States, you can have a correspondent account with financial institutions in the United States, or you can do business with North Korea, but you cannot do both. This has brought the Chinese to the negotiating table. It's brought Russian banks to the negotiating table. It has cut off a lot of the illicit finance that was a lifeline to Pyongyang. And in fact, I had dinner with the ambassador from South Korea, Ambassador Chu, who told me that as a result of our maximum pressure campaign that has brought China into the international community to cut off the flow of funding to North Korea and stop the illicit finance, that as a result of those efforts, we have deprived North Korea of $1 billion in hard currency. And Bill, that does two things. Number one, it puts pressure on North Korea to come to the negotiating table to achieve our strategic objective of a peaceful denuclearization of the peninsula. But in addition to that, it supplements our military deterrence effort because the nuclear program, the ballistic missile program that the Kim regime is pursuing, that is a very expensive program. And depriving the regime of that kind of hard currency makes it harder for them to maintain that nuclear program. Do
you believe there will be a summit with the president and Kim Jong-un at some point this summer?
I do. I was dismayed to hear on this program last week my opponent say that she was glad that the summit wasn't going to go forward. I'm glad that the summit is going forward. I think diplomacy should be our objective. And I am very happy that the work that we're doing in Congress, the work that Ambassador Nikki Haley is doing, Secretary of State Pompeo, in releasing those hostages, it is working. It is forcing North Korea to the negotiating table. Look, we can't trust the Kim regime. We need to have strict verification in place. They have a history of lying, of going back on their word. But the fact is, our pressure campaign is making a difference, and we should be glad that we've abandoned the failed policy of the previous administrations of strategic patience, which facilitated North Korea obtaining a nuclear weapon and the capacity to deliver it through intercontinental ballistic missiles. And Ambassador Haley told me this morning on the phone that not only was the administration's efforts helpful in getting North Korea to this position, but that our efforts, that my bill, that the legislation was indispensable in the process of putting pressure on Chinese banks to put all this pressure on the Kim regime.
You have worked for years on a bill that had its final passage last week that repealed some provisions of the 2010 Dodd-Frank Act that tightened up lending rules after the financial crisis of 2008 that led to the Great Recession. 33 Democrats went along in the vote on that. Smaller banks with under $100 million in assets won't have to meet some requirements. Any concerns on your part that this will make a future financial collapse more likely?
Not at all. You know, Dodd-Frank, the financial control law that was passed in 2010, it was supposed to end too big to fail. It was supposed to eliminate that systemic risk with large Wall Street banks. It was also sold to the American people as protecting consumers. But the reality is that this financial control law resulted in one-size-fits-all avalanche of red tape and regulations and rules that applied equally to small community financial institutions as it did to Wall Street. And the result is that big banks, Wall Street banks, got bigger and more systemically risky, and small community banks are now fewer. And so we've taken away the competition from the big banks. What we're doing with this bipartisan bill is we're focusing the regulatory relief on those credit providers for rural, small-town America that literally will provide greater capital, more access to financial services and products for farmers, for small business owners, for Main Street America, for households that will help lift the economy. And what we've done, Bill, is we've basically, with this legislation, we have unclogged the plumbing of our economy, which is going to further contribute to economic growth.
Those smaller banks, though, so often sell those loans off to places like Countrywide, which is no longer out there, right? So is there a protection in place there that when these loans are packaged and sold in big chunks?
Yeah, it's a great question, Bill, and you put your finger on it, because obviously that originate to distribute model, that was what caused the financial crisis. So I've been working for the last 5.5 years on a solution that not only would provide greater access to responsible mortgage credit, but also prevent the risky practices that caused the financial crisis. My bill that I've been working on, that I've authored 3 consecutive terms in Congress, is called the Portfolio Lending and Mortgage Access Act. That bill that I authored, that I've introduced and reintroduced and worked on for 3 terms, is now law. And it's actually Section 101. It's the very first substantive section of the bill that President Trump signed into law last week. And what it says is that if you're a community bank, if you're a credit union, and you have a personal relationship with that borrower, and you originate that mortgage, and you hold it on your books, you don't sell it into the secondary market, you don't securitize it, you don't sell it to Wall Street, you don't sell it to Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, you hold it on your books, you retain that risk. that bank is going to make sure that they underwrite that risk properly. And so not only does that expand access to mortgage credit and give families and households access to the American dream of home ownership, but it also prevents those risky practices that cause the financial crisis, and it makes sure that those are good loans.
It strikes me that in this campaign that one of the major contrasts and one of the issues is going to be on health care. The Democratic nominee favors a public option that would allow some to pick the government as their insurance carrier. You have vigorously pushed for the repeal and replacement of the Affordable Care Act. Do you anticipate that that will be a major issue going forward? Do you disagree with her trying to provide that option?
Well, yes, I do, because it's government-run health care. It's more of what's created the problem in the first place.
She said she had no problem with and was on for 24 years.
Well, let me tell you, I can just tell you right now that there are a lot of my constituents who are very, very concerned about the aftermath of more government intervention in the economy. And that's because they've lost their choices. They've lost, we only have only one choice in the exchange in central and eastern Kentucky right now. They've lost choices. Their premiums are skyrocketing. And, you know, just right here, I have from the Kentucky Department of Insurance a report that just came out from the Kentucky Department of Insurance that says that there are increases across the board that demonstrate a clear upward trend as the individual market continues to deteriorate. And it also says that there are limited options. People are paying drastically increased premiums, choosing a lower level plan, or looking for alternatives such as no insurance.
So, Congressman, your answer is?
The answer is that Obamacare is failing the people of Kentucky. And what we've been trying to do is give people more choices. Fortunately, we cut taxes for people, working people in central and eastern Kentucky, and many small businesses are saying now that we can afford to contribute more to lower the cost of their health care. So at the end of the day, we do need to fix health care. We've been trying to fix the health care situation in this country. We've been trying to provide more choices. We've been trying to lower costs. Fortunately, we lowered taxes to make it a little bit more bearable, but this is not working. And for the life of me, I don't know why anyone would want to add more government bureaucracy, put more bureaucracy in charge of healthcare when that has, in fact, been the problem in the first place.
Congressman Andy Barr is our guest here on WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. His opponent, Democratic nominee Amy McGrath, was with us last week. We are back with Barr in just a moment. Welcome back. It's WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers, and we're visiting with 6th District Kentucky Congressman Andy Barr, the Republican nominee for another term in Washington. And we'll continue with some issues. The opioid crisis is horrendous. As you know, Congressman, we're losing several people a day in Kentucky to overdoses. It's ruining lives and tearing families apart. There's a national investigation that indicates that drug makers are responsible for enforcing the rules themselves, and that's an issue. Is that a problem in your view?
It is, and also our prescribing practices are a problem. And we've been working with anesthesiologists and other doctors in Kentucky on ways to avoid narcotics and overprescribing. And Congress has taken action here. We urged the president to declare a national emergency. He did so last October, declaring a national public health emergency on the opioid addiction crisis. We're losing 116 Americans to opioid overdose deaths every single day in this country. Kentucky suffers from the 3rd highest overdose mortality rate in the country. So we're taking action. We're getting results. We passed the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act in the last Congress. We included an amendment to that legislation recommended by the University of Kentucky to study best practices to treat neonatal abstinence syndrome. We just recently secured a $5 million grant to the University of Kentucky for their Pathways program to help women and babies who are suffering from opioid addiction. We included in the appropriations bill, which was a $4 billion investment, the largest investment to date to combat opioid addiction in this last appropriations bill, an amendment to increase by $26 million funding for the high-intensity drug trafficking area program, which brings to bear federal law enforcement resources to counties to local law enforcement to, and this is going to help many of the counties in our district, because we're working to get those counties designated as HIDA counties so that federal law enforcement can come in and help. We passed the Interdict Act, which gives the Customs and Border Protection Agency more resources to detect the importation of fentanyl. In addition to that, we just introduced legislation that passed my committee last week on providing more resources from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, Section 8 vouchers for transitional housing for long-term addiction recovery. So we're combating this at all levels: prevention,
so you would say that
law
you have
enforcement, and recovery.
A comprehensive effort underway. Are you satisfied with where we are?
Never satisfied. As long as we have overdoses happening, we need to continue our efforts, and that's why I introduced that amendment that now is law. The HIDA money, the additional $26 million that's going to help our congressional district. It's exactly why we introduced the Thrive Act, which will provide more transitional housing for addiction recovery. You know, a few months ago, Secretary Carson came to Lexington at my request. We toured the recovery Kentucky centers, the Hope Center, St. James Place. We looked at other not-for-profits here that are doing great work. Shepherd's House, Revive in Nicholasville. These are great organizations. Spark in Powell County. These are great organizations doing great work, but they need resources, and that's why we've been providing those resources in our appropriations bill. And also, the 21st Century Cures Act. The 21st Century Cures Act provides block grants to Frankfort, and we're working with the governor's office to provide some of these state block grants to our treatment centers and recovery programs that are working.
All right, to the campaign. When you have the Speaker, Ryan, retiring from the House, when you have Trey Gowdy of South Carolina leaving and saying that he feels very disappointed at how polarized things have gotten up there, is there a general feeling among members that it is no place to be, and here you are seeking a fourth term in Washington?
Well, look, we've gotten results, and I think Speaker Ryan has been in Congress for over 20 years, and he achieved his ultimate objective, which was this growth-producing, comprehensive tax reform, and he's ready now to go do other things, and I respect that. And Trey Gowdy, a friend of mine, he's told me he wants to go back and be a prosecutor.
But he says it's too partisan. He says he's tired of it being so partisan up there.
You know what? I think certainly it is. It is too partisan. But I will tell you, as a member of a bipartisan breakfast group, we have worked on bipartisan legislation. I'm very proud of that. The financial deregulation bill that just became law, that was a bipartisan bill. The bill that we are passing that would make Camp Nelson a national monument, that was introduced by me and a Democrat from Ohio, Marcia Fudge, a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, to commemorate Camp Nelson and the emancipation of Kentucky slaves and at that location and that historic site. We've worked in a bipartisan way with Tulsi Gabbard, a Democrat from Hawaii, on a bill that we passed to provide victims of military sexual trauma with additional non-VA treatment. So we're working in a bipartisan way, and we're getting results.
A few seconds left, Congressman. How do you anticipate this campaign going with you as the GOP nominee and Amy McGrath on the Democratic side, and all this emphasis from the National Democrats to try to take the seat?
Well, look, we're focused on doing the job that we were elected to do. If we do that, the politics will take care of itself. It is true that Mayor Gray pointed out that my opponent never lived a day in her life in this district until she decided to run for Congress, and that's true. And it's also true that Reggie Thomas said that my opponent was unfamiliar with the district, and that's true. It's also true that the Lexington Herald Leader pointed out that over 80% of her resources came from outside of the Commonwealth. That's also true, and all of that shows that she's not in touch with the district. Our record of accomplishment, of focusing on the signature industries of this district, of passing tax cuts for the bourbon industry, tax cuts for the horse industry, tax cuts for Toyota Motor Manufacturing Kentucky, tax cuts for working families, regulatory relief that will give more families more access to the financial system, our work on national security on North Korea, our fighting for families who are struggling with opioid addiction. Our record is what will get the job done in November. But more importantly, we want to focus on solving problems and getting results, and that's what we're doing.
Thank you for coming, Congressman. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you very much.
And we'll be back on WKYT with a special interview ahead on WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. And we welcome you back to Kentucky Newsmakers here on WKYT. We're glad you're with us. And now a special interview from our Washington, D.C. Bureau Chief, Jacqueline Policastro, who talks with first daughter Ivanka Trump. They stroll the White House lawn. They talk about how important it is to get kids moving and involved in sports and other activities.
Ivanka Trump, advisor to the president, thanks so much for joining us. You want to get more kids involved in team sports. Why is this so important to you?
It's incredibly important to me. It's part of our working family agenda here at the White House. The President's Council on Sports and Fitness has actually been around since President Eisenhower, but we really wanted to elevate it because unfortunately youth sports participation in this country has been decreasing precipitously. Just over the last decade, in 2008, 45% of all students between the ages of 6 and 12 participated in athletics. Now that's down to 37%, and it's trending clearly in the wrong direction. So we want to change that, not only because it's fun and it's great to get moving, and as we can see, there are a lot of smiles on these kids' faces today, but also because it affects positive outcomes. There's tons of research that supports the fact that kids who participate in sports are more likely to earn higher wages, graduate from high school, stay out of trouble, not commit a crime or be a victim of a crime.
There are more than 250 kids here at the White House from all across the country playing sports in the backyard.
Which is so much fun. We're going to have to go visit a lot of them. And actually the members of the council, many of which who are friends of mine and I recruited to participate, have long been champions of their own sports, whether it's Mariana Rivera or Herschel Walker or Misty May Trainer. So this, Jacqueline, is Misty May Trainer,
nice to meet you.
who obviously needs no introduction.
So happy to be here. Hi, ladies.
Hi, guys.
First step, you just gotta play. That's basically it. And second, trust in each other, respect each other, and then you gotta outwork your opponents. So there's never an off day. If you want to be good, there's never an off day.
That's
I hate
true
to tell
in
you.
sports and in life, right? So the grit and perseverance, and Misty embodies that. So you've got a great mentor here, and I hope you guys have a lot of fun.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Young girls drop out of sports, group sports, around the age of 14 and at twice the rate of boys. Why is it important to make sure we mentor young girls? What's your message to them?
So a lot of families simply can't afford for their children to participate in sports, and this is something that's been evolving and has changed over time. Pay-to-play policies or schools requiring that kids purchase their own equipment or pay for the cost of travel has made it so that the average cost per child per sport to play is around $400 a student. So for a lot of families, it's just simply not affordable. And a lot of times girls are the ones not given the opportunity because maybe they don't have the athletic talent or maybe they don't have the sport within their community that they excel at. So there's just not an option available to them, or the scholarship is less of an obvious outcome for them. So unfortunately, girls are disproportionately affected. And we think while we have some great Olympians here with us today, you shouldn't play just with the goal of being a great Olympian. That's an awesome outcome, tremendous. I wish it could have happened to me. I'm a very recreational sports player, but there's so much to be learned from a character perspective, from a social skills perspective, just by playing. So that's what we're encouraging here.
Did you play any team sports as a kid? Do you have a favorite athlete?
Ooh, so I played a lot of sports as a kid. My mom was a professional skier. My grandfather was an unbelievable swimmer. He trained the Czech national team. I was a ballerina, which is kind of a team. Sports. I danced in the Nutcracker. And I played soccer and I played volleyball. Although, don't ask me to try because I don't think I played since I was around 12. But no, I was always very active, although I didn't particularly excel, other than skiing. I'm a pretty good skier.
Well, skiing is fun.
Skiing's very fun. High five!
You've met a lot of children today out here playing sports at the White House. What do you hope they take away from this experience?
Well, first of all, I hope they have a fun day, because this is about celebration for them and fun. I hope that they're exposed to sports they may not have otherwise tried or been introduced to before. And I hope that we're able to begin a national dialogue, elevate awareness about the positive outcomes associated with youth sports participation, and reverse that trend towards it declining. And I think today and the formation of the council is an incredible first step towards achieving that goal.
Ivanka Trump, advisor to the president and first daughter, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it. Thank you.
And Jacqueline Paula Castro with that interview from our Washington Bureau. And by the way, our Washington Bureau stays in contact with our Kentucky congressional delegation at the Capitol, as we do here at home with their staffs here. That teamwork allows us to keep close watch on policies and politics that affect us here in the Commonwealth. You can follow me on Twitter for updates and insights on what's happening in Kentucky politics. I'm at KY Newsmakers. And a reminder that our WKYT Kentucky Newsmakers interviews also go up on YouTube, so they're available for you to watch on demand on WKYT's YouTube channel. Join us early this week on WKYT This Morning. We begin bright and early at 4:30. Thanks for being with us. We hope you make it a good week ahead.